banging of war drums. That's not the only intervention that the British media plays. The other is election interference, Charles.
Yes, and not just the British media. I mean, last week I spoke about the feeling of disenfranchisement across the electorate and the record number of independent candidates that are going to be standing in this general election. But what I'd like to look at today are some of the obstacles presented to those candidates and effectively what looks like a deliberate engineering of the system in order to suppress independent candidates, of course, because they cannot be controlled in the same way that candidates or indeed MPs belonging to a political party can be. So just a couple of headlines from local newspapers talking about independent candidates not invited to hustings. But I just want to give the background to this. And of course, the Electoral Commission, whilst writing about how to conduct or hold hustings, make it very clear that there are, of course, two different types. So they say that some hustings cannot be reasonably regarded as intended to promote any parties or candidates over any others. We call this a non-selective hustings. And there's therefore a spending implication, or at least declaration on that. But in addition to non-selective, the guidance also explains situations in which hustings can be reasonably regarded as intended to promote the candidates or parties who attend. We call this a selective hustings. In this case, either the hustings organiser or the candidates or parties may need to account for the spending. Now, that therefore is that actually it's not the Electoral Commission that dictates who would be invited to hustings, it's the organiser. And we'll just have a run through of some of the possibilities or some of the slants on hustings, which might dictate exactly why independent candidates wouldn't be asked. So first of all, we'll look at Friends of the Earth. So obviously there's going to be an environmental bent to a hustings organised by Friends of the Earth. We've then got from West Coast Today, the Oban hustings. Election candidates speak on LGBTQ plus and local issues. Then the Operation Black Vote, hosting a national series of political hustings. Then we go to the Muslim Council of Britain, hustings at mosques, and then Jewish community hustings written up for the general election 2024. So the point about that is that there is, in effect, no control mechanism by which an independent candidate may squeeze themselves into these selective hustings. So that's the first part of it. The second part, as Mike says, is the media coverage. And this is governed by Ofcom and effectively is tantamount to censorship of independent candidates by means of the guidance that they have written down, or at least the rules they've written down in Elections and Referendums, Section 6. So particularly Section 6.2, due weight must be given to the coverage of parties and independent candidates during the election period. In determining the appropriate level of coverage to be given, broadcasters must take into account evidence of past electoral support and or current support. Well, of course, that's rather a closed loop, because if it's an independent candidate that hasn't stood before, there will be no evidence of past electoral support. And if the media or broadcasters have not previously been reporting accurately the level of support for an independent candidate, then they're absolutely trapped. And Ofcom will perpetuate that cycle. It goes on, Rule 6.2, due weight must be given to designated organisations in coverage during the referendum period. Broadcasters must also consider giving appropriate coverage to other permitted participants with significant views and perspectives. Now, that is a very, effectively ambiguous statement in which it might be interpreted in any way. Permitted participants with significant views and perspectives. Well, who judges that? There's guidance on this. And of course, Ofcom actually clarified by saying it's an editorial decision for the broadcaster as to what constitutes appropriate coverage in relation to Rule 6.2. The concept of giving due weight as required by Rule 6.2 is flexible. Its application depends on the electoral context. So it's quite clear to see that the system is such that the independent candidates may be shut out at will, not just by the organisers of hustings, but also by the broadcasters. And the other thing I just thought we'd look at, given that it's Pride Month, there's been some talk about the Labour manifesto and what they've put out about transgender people, and they're calling this respect and opportunity for all. That's the heading they've given this. But I just want to highlight the hypocrisy of it. They say so-called conversion therapy is abuse. There is no other word for it. So Labour will finally deliver a full trans-inclusive ban on conversion practices while protecting the freedom for people to explore their sexual orientation and gender identity. Of course, given that it is Pride Month, and given that there is a wave of targeted propaganda at particularly young people with the apparent benefit of being able to change gender at will, the fact that they are describing conversion therapy as abuse is telling, and of course back to front, because in effect what they're allowing for is conversion therapy, or at least is the absolute encouragement of people to change gender in the first place. They then go on to say they'll modernise, simplify and reform the intrusive and outdated gender recognition law to a new process, will remove indignities for trans people who deserve recognition and acceptance, whilst retaining the need for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria from a specialist doctor, enabling access to the healthcare pathway. Now, there are many issues that crop up there, but I think the main thing that's never concentrated on in this debate are these supposed healthcare professionals who are actually providing a diagnosis and giving, in effect, a clinical recognition to this that puts them on the so-called healthcare pathway. And these are the people that need to be held to account, and very seldom are they ever mentioned.
Yes, okay, thank you for that, Charles. Okay, if you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, you can do so at support.ukcolumn.org. The options are there. Membership is £5 a month. We do need your support. If you can do that, please help us out. But do share material you find on the various platforms, not Facebook, but certainly ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. You could pick something up at the UK Column shop. And I will say again, a massive thank you to everybody that's grabbed a copy of Your Life in Their Hands. If you haven't got a copy of this yet, we are encouraging everybody, especially members, to get a copy. We want this distributed as far and wide as we possibly can. So if you haven't got a copy yet, please do get hold of one. Okay, we have the interview you did, Charles, with Mark Byford on the website.
Yeah, it's a terrific interview. It's got very good feedback so far. Mark is a farmer in Suffolk, and he's a rare breed because he has a very clear idea of what's gone wrong in terms of farming practices and the control mechanisms, but also destruction of the environment. But he has practical means by which this can be changed, both at the sort of bigger farm level, but also at the individual level, how you can get involved and take control of your own food supply. So I'd really encourage you to listen to that.
Thank you. And tomorrow at 1 p.m, Debbie will be speaking to Ursula Edgington, who is from New Zealand, and they're going to be covering all the COVID-related stuff that happened in New Zealand and what's happened since. So join us for that at 1 p.m. tomorrow. A date for your diary: Saturday, the 19th of October, 2024, in Bristol. We will be holding a really live event, and so we will be there, and the venue will be announced much closer to the time, but keep an eye out for further information about this. And then for the final time now, the Sounds Beautiful Festival in Wimborne and Dorset begins, tomorrow. And I think Kenny is already there today, but we will all be there for that. So if you're joining us for that, please, we hope to see you and look forward to meeting you. Okay, now, Charles, where does that take us? That takes us